Well, good afternoon and welcome. Well, the afternoon, morning that you're watching these scenes in. I'm Archbishop Dennis Golphin, and my colleague, Bishop Andy Lewter, is with me, and we have been doing conversations regarding the church, ancient and modern today. Bishop?
Well, thank you so much, Archbishop. And again, I'm delighted to be with you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation and everything that we have to offer your viewing audience today. Listen, it's my hope and my prayer that those things that we discuss and talk about will find a home in your heart and application to your life and will expand your own skill set and your understanding of who we are in the body of Christ.
Bishop, as you know, you and I, we've been telling people we've been colleagues and friends and scholars and been teaching together for well over 20 years. We've done a lot of classes together. We have the Graduate School of Episcopal Studies, where we've got those. We were really pioneers back in 2015 trying to get some of these video courses and classes online. And through those years, over 20, you and I have been training bishops in the episcopacy, you and your organization and me and my organization, and then we've collaborated on a lot of co-teaching throughout the years. So we have, again, I want to just kind of put up our books. We're kind of really talking a lot about both of our current books were out. We both have other books, but My Trojan Horse Syndrome and From Apostles to Bishops that Bishop has written. We'll give you some information about those in a little bit. But what we've been doing is talking about the ancient church and the modern church and the problems we have in both. So, Bishop, let's just open our discussion and just kind of pick up where we were before. We were kind of bringing us along with the church. I just want to say one thing, and then you can join and sort of put us together. I think one of the things we misunderstand, and I say it a lot, and that's the romancing of the early church. That sometimes in the modern church we're in now, in our need to try to go back to try to recover the ancient church, we romance what we think the ancient church was. And you and I have been teaching for years about, especially when you teach in the first 500 years of the church, that was really around 300s before the church even becomes governmental and institutionalized into something we can formally look at as it goes today. So let's kind of pick up that conversation and talk about the difference in church leadership from the beginning to where it is now.
Archbishop, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you and your perspective is that when you identify these efforts on the part of current day reformations and denominations, you mention and reference the fact that there is an attempt to recover the primitive and to rediscover what the church was initially doing and to try and reenact that or imitate the behavior that current reformations anticipate or assume the early church was doing or the first church was doing. Of course, the challenge with that is that the early church had a different priority, a different perspective, and a different agenda, not the least of which was the belief that Jesus was going to return immediately. So they did not, especially in that first 100 years, they did not necessarily concern themselves with longevity and tenure. And when you talk about, well, what was the early church doing? They were getting ready for what they thought was the end of the world. It never crossed their mind that 500 years later, 1,000 years later, 1,500 years later, 2,000 years later, that the church would still be around, that the world would still be around, and that what they were doing would have this kind of lengthy tradition that would last over a long period of time. And so when we try and go back and recover, rediscover, and then imitate what it was that the church was doing, we have to understand that that was a totally different mindset, a totally different approach, and a totally different agenda.
I agree, Bishop. And I think one of the issues, as you talk about this eschatological problem that the early church had, one of the things you mentioned is a Latin term, and I think we can deal with that about what the first couple centuries of the church was. It was illegal. And you mentioned that a lot, that the fact that the church was an outlaw church.
That's
It
correct.
was not public, it was not received by society. It was more of an outlaw church. Can you mention that?
Sure. The Latin term is religio illicita, illicit, illegal, religio illicita. Now, around 313, between 313 and 318 AD, there is this transition from religio illicita to religio licita. But let me kind of go back to the core of why the church was tagged and identified as being an outlaw church. One of the reasons and one of the real problems that the early church had was that it initially had a very strong identity with the Jewish sectarian movement. It was seen as a part of the Jewish community. It was identified as a branch of Judaism, right alongside the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Qumranites, the Zealots. Christians were considered a part of that matrix, part of that makeup, part of that constituency. So when Titus returns to Jerusalem after 3 years of the city having been abandoned by the Romans, Vespasian, his father, when Titus returns and reduces the city to rubble, destroys the temple, and makes outlaw or illegal everything that is Judaism, Christianity got caught up in that. They were
That's
part
right.
of that identity. And so for the first 200 to 300 years, one of the reasons the persecution and the treatment of Christians was so harsh is because they were identified with a group that the Roman Empire had decided they wanted to wipe off the face of the earth. And it wasn't until Christians were able to convince Romans that we're not part of that group. We're separate from that group. They started using this language. I came into my own and my own received me not. They used the rhetoric of separation and distinction. But up until that time, they were on the chopping block just like the rest of Judaism was. Listen, watch this, Archbishop. It is not by accident that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Qumranites, none of them survived the first century. By the end of the first century, all of them are gone. And the reason Christianity survives and is around today is because it successfully disassociated itself from Judaism so that it would not be wiped out alongside all of the other facets, aspects, and expressions of Judaism that was going on at that particular time.
Bishop, we both skip around a lot in terms of what we're talking about with this idea. I think one of the things I want to mention, just to put a little gap in where you are, is to mention the fact that the church was primarily Jewish prior to all of this, especially in the first 40 years. I think we missed, especially the day of Pentecost, we missed the fact that this was a Jewish celebration, the Feast of Pentecost, and the 3,000 that came in were primarily Jews.
Jews, that's right.
Came down primarily when they come out of the upper room and they come down. This is a Jewish celebration. This is a Jewish Renaissance. I love the way N.T. Wright puts it. He puts the fact that when Jesus got up, he began the revolution. So this is a revolution that the early Jews were not prepared for. The kind of revolution they wanted, even from Palm Sunday, was to get a deliverer who would run in, a messianic leader who would ride as a conqueror and take them out of Roman bondage, put them back on top of the world. It was to be another renaissance of past deliverances, to see, as Daniel prophesied and other later prophets, that this Messiah would come in and rule. What none of the other prophets saw was that it was going to be a two-stage coming. So he comes this time, and I mention this a lot, that he came this time is important, Bishop, that he came for salvation this time. He's going to come for deliverance the next time.
Wow.
Matthew's 121 says he came to save his people, not to deliver his people.
Mm-hmm,
Deliverance
mm-hmm.
will come in the second coming. In the first coming, I believe what Jesus wanted to do, and we see it in this whole layout, was to change the thinking of the religious groups of his day. He spends a lot of time reorientating to them who God really is and what their real focus should be in their identity of being a monotheistic people.
Sure. Yeah. And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I totally agree that they missed the agenda and the objective of Jesus's initial earthly visit. And of course, part of the reason they do so is because they're leaning back, Archbishop, on this past history of 400 years earlier. Let us not forget
Yes.
that Matthias Maccabee, Jonathan Maccabee, Simon Maccabee, Judas Maccabee, we have this priest by the name of Matthias Maccabee and his 5 sons who raise up against the Greek Syrians. And in that instance, they did drive the invaders out of the city. They did rededicate the temple. They did create a Jewish event called Hanukkah, where they would celebrate every year the victory over the invaders in the city of Jerusalem and in the land of Palestine. So we understand why they thought the way they thought and why they felt the way they felt, because there was precedent and there was history that had taken place. And their attitude was, if God did it for the Maccabees 400 years ago, he could do it for us now.
Right. And I think that when we talk about this whole issue of the first 40 years, which are completely important because it's in that 40-year generation that Jesus began to say that this generation would not pass until all these things come to pass. He prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem. That's very important. He prophesied that this was going to happen. And of course, after 70 AD, you have this focus more on Christians who fled to the mountains. They actually left the city because of what Jesus said in Matthew 24, and of course in Luke 21 and Mark 14, this last sermon that he gave and began to talk about what was going to happen at the end times. The Christians abandoned the Jews, as so to speak.
That's right.
So after that, you have a whole resurgence. It's almost the 90s before Rome really understands that this is a separate group. They start seeing things to understand that Christianity is an entirely separate group from these Jews who are trying to come out. They almost push them all out in the 70s. And of course, the Jews never accepted Gentiles. And remember, it is Paul initially who has been authorized to get the Jews who have been following this Messiah. So he was arresting people and causing people to come out who were Jews, who according to the temple guards, he was coming. He was going out and authorized to arrest these people. And of course, he got arrested by Jesus.
Sure. Yeah. Indeed. He was, if we were to contemporize the scene, Paul was the leader of an ICE unit, whose job it was to round up these Christians and deal with them harshly, just like we're seeing the manner and the behavior of ICE units even today.
Right, I agree. So I think that we're going to cover a lot in our next conversations regarding this, because we're kind of giving you some headway. You want to go to Amazon and get Bishop's book on apostles and bishops, because some of this early church history is in there. And he's taken us up some ways. I would say Bishop would be in the first 500 years, right?
Yeah, or more specifically, especially, so there's a 2-volume work that I have. That first volume, Apostles to Bishops, really kinds of ends around the Council of Nicaea. So it's really the first 350 years. And then I do have a second work entitled The Office of a Bishop that pushes back a little bit to the book of Acts and goes all the way to Azusa Street and beyond. So some of that is overlapping.
I think it's great. We're going to pick this conversation up in our next session. And really, I hope you're enjoying this with us. Let us know if this is blessing you and some of the things you want to hear about. We're going to be talking more about the modern church in the next recording, too. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.